Now, whether Callum Smith is the best super middleweight in the world is still up for debate, I think, with the likes of Gilberto Ramirez still hanging about undefeated and with a belt of his own. But he certainly made his claim in beating George Groves, collecting his WBA belt, the Muhammad Ali trophy, and winning the whole final of a not a particularly great tournament, not a lot of name guys. Certainly the previous one with the likes of Froch, Ward and Kessler was better, but it ended with a bang. It did get rowdy and Saudi, and full credit to Callum Smith for doing what he promised. It does have to be said, though, that during the weigh-in he looked at Groves, and similar to the way Bellew was banking on Hay not being the same guy, and that was part of his angle, that sounded like that was part of Callum Smith's angle in his defeat of Groves as well. He said he was looking at a dead man, were they his words? He could see a guy who basically physically isn't at his best anymore, and this, of course, is an old theory we've all had at Groves. I've had it for a while. I wouldn't want to say he got cobra'd because it's a very crude way of putting things, but I think mentally as well, I don't think he fully digested the Froch losses, and he kind of carried on, I think, with a little bit of the shadow of knowing that even though he became a world champion, in terms of the hype and people being interested in boxing in general, he'd hit the peak with the Froch rematch. Of course, he didn't convert it into a victory, and I think there was always a bit of a shadow there. Physically, not the same guy. Now, I did have him up in the fight at least by 4-2, but the right hand that in the early days when he was coming up, it always used to be very snappy and down the pipe. That was the shot as well that he should have been trying to ping Callum with, who's not defensively that great. You know, he just kind of wears the earmuffs and does what he can. What he does is crisp, but it's basic and he's a big target. The younger Groves would have been able to attack better, but this time he was cuffing his right hand. It had a forced, pushy look, and there were times on the replay I was watching where Groves was missing the right hand quite obviously. It was as if his glove had an extra weight in it and he just couldn't snap it. The same thing. You see similar things from fighters, including the likes of Manny Pacquiao. When they age, they just can't throw their punch as well. Now, of course, Pacquiao at 30 was still basically in his prime, but people age differently, and coupled with, I think, all the changes, the unfavourable changes in Groves' career, Paddy Fitzpatrick, all that bollocks during the peak stage of his career when he really needed to get that world title, it didn't happen. He's had a tricky, unfortunate career, Groves. But it's not just the fact that Groves is physically past his prime that he lost this fight. In both instances, he was given trouble. First in the third, and then when he finished in the seventh, he sacrificed positioning. Now, this is an inherent technical, stylistic flaw that he's committed throughout his career, or certainly it's been a more common occurrence after he left Booth, in that, you know, he always has a low guard, and he likes to see what you're doing from a distance, ping you, and then straight right hand. It's basic, but when he was at his best, it worked very effectively. Now, against Smith, he was doing things, and I saw them before they happened. I shook my head. In the third round, he must have seen maybe he hurt him, and then he was pressing an advantage that wasn't really there. In doing so, he sacrificed positioning, got hit with the right hand he shouldn't have. And then in the seventh, again, he comes in with a right hand like this, puts quite a lot on it. He thinks, you know, he's getting somewhere, and I'm just thinking in my head, Groves, you're fighting not very effectively again. And then all credit to Callum. He does a catch hook, caught it beautifully, and a lovely little hook there. Similar punch that Dylan White put Joseph Parker down. It was lovely. Very good instincts and very well executed, but Groves gave him that rope. He gave him that opportunity. Kind of like Amir Khan as well, has the same problem, why he's partly got knocked out a bit. Not just the bad chins, but they sacrifice positioning. The guys who are better at boxing on the outside, they go, all right, I'm going to come into a range now where defensively I'm not that good, and I'm not known for any particularly good mid-range shots as well. And, you know, it's just Groves has always done it. And when he was backwards against the ropes as well, he looked uncomfortable, particularly after the second Froch loss. He's fought with a certain vulnerability and sluggishness that looks like, and everybody he's fought has been saying, I'm going to exploit it. It's something all opponents have seen. They're all like, I'm going to drown Groves later. And that's part of what happened. You know, he partly helped Smith get the victory, who was doing what he did well, but it was pretty basic as well, and he'd pretty much gone to sleep in the 6th or 7th round, and it looked like Groves was getting momentum. But at the same time, it was good as a shot. It wasn't amazing, and Groves showed that vulnerability. It all fell apart, and he did not have the stomach to continue. You know, you can look back, you know, ultimately it's the fighter who was in charge, but I think Groves is somebody who very much suffered by getting rid of Adam Booth. I think the only time I've seen George Groves fight to a really good game plan was against De Gale, where he was strict every round, and that's because he had Booth in the corner each time going, do this, do this, do this. Since then, he's let his heart rule a bit. Again, he gets himself in bad positions, and it may have made for quite exciting viewing with him, but it didn't get the most out of him as a fighter for a guy who doesn't have the highest ring IQ, between the bells. So you can't take away from Callum Smith. He did what he had to do. He was crisp, he was economic, and even if he wasn't going to get him in the 7th, he had basically the second half of the fight to work, his advantage and find him. So fair play to him. Groves says he isn't going to, retire. He won't want to feel that this guy's retired him. When you ask that question, of course, the fighter in you're going to be like, no, I'm going to decide when I want to retire. And you don't want to be asked that straight away. You need things to settle. But Groves has pretty much done what he's got to do. He did become a world champion against Chudinov, whatever that means, paper champion or not. He did it. But his biggest contribution, of course, was really reviving boxing to what it is now. The fact he got that stadium fight against Froch. I remember the feeling before the Froch rematch, and of course the first fight, which was so good. It created such excitement in British boxing, which hasn't been there for so long. Even during the Hatton days and the Calzaghe days, they were exciting because we had hold of a great world champion who was going places, but there wasn't that rivalry or excitement, and particularly two guys from the same country, that spikiness like the likes of Ben and Eubank. We had it again with Froch Groves, and it's what created the opportunity to have in Wembley Stadium. I remember the moment just before it was like, oh, where are we going to have it? Could we have it in a football grounds? Could it be Wembley Stadium? And it did, and they capitalised on that, and they the whole imagination of British boxing went up from then. Eddie Hearn has since capitalised on it like crazy with Anthony Joshua, but George Groves is a big part of that, and I feel, he became world champ, but I think his impact on British boxing is what will ultimately go on to be his biggest legacy. So as for Callum Smith, big congratulations. I hope he fights Gilberto Ramirez. I think that's the one to be had, and Ramirez is very big himself at 6'2", so interesting there. As for George Groves, commiserations, I think he's a likeable guy. He's always brought excitement. I do feel the old cliche, had he stayed with Booth, things might have been a bit different. Who knows, maybe he would have beaten Froch in that first fight. But he's got nothing to be ashamed of. He's always given it his all, and credit to the sport.